The Man Who Delayed the Sun. An espionage story of conscience, time, and the birth of the atomic age.
Prologue. Before dawn, the desert did not sleep. It lay open under a hard scatter of stars, breath held in the cold, as if even the rocks had learned to listen. The men in jeeps spoke in whispers, and even the soldiers who had been shouting all week now moved like guilty children through the dark. Dr. Simon Caldwell stood with his hands buried deep in his coat pockets, collar up, a narrow cigarette unlit between his fingers. He had been told not to smoke. He had been told 1,000 things since he came to this place. What to call the place, what not to call it, what not to say, what not to write, what not to wonder aloud. It was the wondering that got him into trouble. A string of lights marked the road behind them like a spine. Ahead, miles away, was a thin black scaffold rising from the sand, a tower with something at its top that no one said bomb aloud. They used other words. Device, gadget, assembly, the language of men who wanted to keep their hands clean while they dirtied the world. To his left, a man with a clipboard checked his watch for the 10th time. To his right, a younger physicist, American, pale, brilliant, kept rubbing his face as if he could wipe the night from it. Somewhere behind them, in the command bunker, a voice droned over a telephone line, counting down and pausing, as though time itself had become a cautious clerk. Simon looked at the eastern horizon. It was still black. He remembered, suddenly and violently, the first time he had watched sunrise from the roof of his college rooms in Cambridge, years before the war. He and 3 friends had stolen a bottle of something cheap and celebratory, and one of them, his brother Peter, had held the bottle aloft and announced very solemnly that the sun was an old liar and would rise whether one deserved it or not. Peter was dead now. Most of his friends were scattered or dead. His college rooms had been requisitioned. His country had been pounded from the air. His profession, his beloved, abstract, elegant physics, had been drafted and uniformed and marched into the service of annihilation. And here he was, in the New Mexico desert, waiting to see if men could make a new sun on command. The irony tasted metallic. A voice behind him said quietly, "You're shaking." Simon turned. It was Dr. Margaret Rowland, Mags to everyone, a mathematician with sharp eyes and a habit of speaking as if she was half amused by the world and half tired of it. She held a paper cup of coffee in both hands. The coffee steamed and smelled burnt. "I'm not shaking," Simon said automatically. She raised an eyebrow. He looked down. The cigarette between his fingers trembled. It wasn't fear, he told himself. It was cold. It was always cold before dawn in deserts. It was the body's small betrayal. Mags looked past him toward the tower. "Do you think it'll work?" she asked. Simon's throat tightened. "Work!" A word used for radios, for bridges, for engines, not for this. "I think," he said carefully, "it will do whatever we taught it to do." Mags's mouth tightened as if she'd been slapped by a thought. In the distance, the horizon remained stubbornly dark. Somewhere, far off, an owl called once, an absurd, ordinary sound in an extraordinary moment. Simon imagined, without willing it, the shape of the world after this morning. He imagined fire. He imagined headlines. He imagined men in suits speaking into microphones about necessity. He imagined the old lie of righteous violence dressed up in new mathematics. And he imagined something else, too, a tiny, petty human hope that had driven him for months like a splinter under the skin. Delay, a week, a month, a season. Time enough for diplomats to find the courage they never had when men were dying with bayonets. Time enough for generals to win without needing to vaporize cities. Time enough, perhaps, for the world to reach the end of the war and step, breathless, exhausted, into peace before this thing could be loosed. That had been his dream, his sin, his private prayer. He had not wanted to stop the sun. He had only wanted to push back the dawn. From the bunker, the voice on the line said, "T minus 60 seconds." Mags's hand found his sleeve briefly, as if they were children again. and the night was something to endure together. Simon stared at the horizon, still black. He thought of the numbers he had written, the numbers he had not written, the numbers he had sent away into the world with tiny imperfections hidden inside them like poison needles. He thought of the woman in Santa Fe who could smile like a saint and threaten like a knife. He thought of a German man with 2 quiet shoes and a handshake like cold meat. He thought of the question that had haunted him since London burned. Can delay itself be a moral act? The voice said, 30 seconds. The desert held its breath. And Simon Caldwell, the man who had tried to delay the sun, waited to see whether his small corruptions of truth had mattered at all. 1. The British guest. 9 months earlier, Los Alamos had felt less like a laboratory and more like a rumor. Simon arrived under a name that was his but also not his, on papers that instructed him to forget he had ever been anywhere else. The last part of the journey was by bus, rattling up a narrow road through the mountains. He watched pine trees slide past like silent guards. The bus was full of men who stared too long at everything, as if memorizing it before it was taken away. There were a few women, too, mostly younger and practical-looking, their hair pinned up, their mouths set in lines that suggested determination rather than fear. No one talked much. At the gate, military police checked their badges and made jokes that didn't quite land. A sign warned that photography was forbidden. Another sign warned that gossip was forbidden. A third warned about the fire hazard of cigarettes. Simon read the signs with the weary fascination of someone watching a society invent new taboos in real time. A stocky man in an army uniform boarded the bus, scanned faces and barked names. When he reached Caldwell, his gaze lingered a fraction longer than necessary. "British mission," the soldier said, not a question, not quite a greeting. "Yes," Simon replied. The soldier's eyes narrowed, then shifted away as if Britishness itself was a smell he didn't trust. They drove on. Los Alamos was a constructed village clinging to a plateau, rows of identical houses, muddy roads, offices that were too clean, barracks that were not clean enough. It had the feel of a place built in a hurry by men who thought they could outrun consequences. Simon was met by Commander Hugh Larkin, Royal Navy, though his work now had nothing to do with ships. Larkin wore civilian clothes that couldn't quite disguise the military in him. His hair was neat, his eyes were the color of rain. "Caldwell," Larkin said, shaking his hand with practiced firmness. "Welcome to the end of the world." Simon attempted a smile. "You make it sound charming." "It's not," Larkin said, then softer. "Listen to me, you're a guest here. A valuable guest, but still a guest. That means you mind your manners and you mind your papers. You don't wander. You don't ask about things you're not assigned to. You don't write letters that mention where you are, what you're doing, or what you're thinking." Simon's smile faded. "What I'm thinking," he repeated. Larkin's gaze sharpened. "Especially that." He led Simon to a small office building. Inside, the air smelled of chalk dust and heated metal. In a room crowded with blackboards, a man with hollow cheeks and intense eyes stood amid a cluster of physicists, gesturing with a cigarette like a conductor. "That's Oppenheimer," Larkin murmured as they paused in the doorway. "The director. He's persuasive." The man turned as if sensing attention, and his gaze flicked over Simon. "Ah," he said, voice unexpectedly gentle. "Our British reinforcement. Dr. Caldwell, isn't it? We're delighted." His accent had a soft Midwestern lilt. His eyes were bright in a way that made Simon think of fever. Simon stepped forward and shook hands. "Thank you," Simon said. "Delighted to be—" He almost said here, he caught himself. "Of use." Oppenheimer smiled. "Of use, exactly. We have a tendency to recruit brilliant people and then ask them to do dull things. You'll forgive us." "I've done my share of dull things," Simon said. "That's why you're dangerous," Oppenheimer replied, and it took Simon a moment to realize it was intended as a joke. The room laughed politely, then the chalk began to move again, and Simon found himself drawn toward a blackboard covered in symbols and arcs and numbers, like a map of an uncharted continent. They were discussing implosion. Not the concept. Simon already understood the concept. It was the details they were wrestling with, how to take a mass of material and compress it fast enough, evenly enough, to cross a threshold of no return. In the corner, a thin man with a serious face and a German accent stood silently, listening. "Klaus," Oppenheimer said, noticing Simon's glance. "Dr. Fuchs. He's part of your mission as well. You may know him from the other work." Simon did know him, by reputation, if not personally. A refugee from Germany. Brilliant, quiet, an embodiment of the strange way the war had scrambled loyalties until a man's birthplace meant less than his ability to calculate. Fuchs nodded at Simon with restrained politeness. "Dr. Caldwell," he said. "Dr. Fuchs," Simon replied. Later, after the meeting, Larkin guided Simon to his assigned quarters. A small room with a narrow bed, a desk, and a window that looked out over scrub and distant mountains. The desk held a stack of forms and a book of regulations. Larkin closed the door behind them. "You'll work under Dr. Hart," he said. "He runs a theoretical group. Don't be fooled by the word theoretical. Everything here turns into hardware sooner than you think." Simon set his suitcase down. Larkin hesitated, then lowered his voice. "There are rumors," he said, "about Soviet interest, about leaks, about sympathizers." Simon's stomach tightened. "I'm not a sympathizer," he said. Larkin looked at him steadily. "I don't care what you are in private. I care what you do. If you think this is an academic exercise, you'll get yourself killed. Or worse, you'll get someone else killed." Simon wanted to say something sharp, something British and deflecting, but the exhaustion of travel and secrecy sat in his bones. "What if I think," Simon said quietly, "that what we're building will kill far more than any spy ever could?" Larkin's eyes hardened. "Then you keep that thought in your head," he said, "and you do your job. That's the only moral choice left to you." He left, closing the door with a soft, final click. Simon sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the desk. There was a pencil and a pad of paper. He reached for the pencil, then stopped. In his mind, he heard his brother's voice from years ago. "The sun is an old liar and will rise whether one deserves it or not." Simon looked out the window at the wide, indifferent landscape. In this place, they were building a second sun. He had come officially to help it rise. And already, against his will, a different thought began to form, quiet, treasonous, intoxicating. What if he could slow it, not stop it, not destroy it, just slow it? A week, a month. Time enough for the war to end without this horror. Time enough for people to choose something else. Simon picked up the pencil. He wrote his name at the top of the page like a man signing a confession. To a woman named Irene. Santa Fe was only a short drive away, but it might as well have been another country. The first time Simon went down from the hill, it was on official business. A procurement meeting, a list of supplies, an escort who made it clear that off-duty did not mean unsupervised. Still, the air felt different in town, less guarded. The streets had ordinary people on them, shopkeepers, children, tourists who had no idea what slept in the mountains above them. The cafes smelled of chile and coffee. The art galleries displayed paintings of sunsets that looked almost mocking in their harmless beauty. Simon walked with his escort, a bored young soldier named Whitcomb, whose conversation consisted mostly of complaints about the food at the mess. They stopped at a pharmacy to collect medical supplies. While Whitcomb spoke to the clerk, Simon wandered a few feet away to look at a rack of postcards. A woman stood there already, turning a postcard over in her hands as if reading its blank back were more interesting than its picture. She was in her early 30s, Simon guessed. Dark hair pinned neatly. A simple dress. A scarf tied at her neck with careless elegance. Her posture was straight but not rigid. She carried herself like someone who had learned to stand in rooms where any weakness would be used against her. She glanced up. Her eyes met his, held for half a second too long, then shifted away. "Lovely, aren't they?" she said, her English precise with only the faintest foreign edge. "Postcards," Simon replied. "Sunsets," she said, tapping the image with one finger. "They sell them like souvenirs, as if you could own the sky." Simon felt an inexplicable shiver. He had seen enough covert meetings in wartime London to recognize the shape of one beginning, even if he couldn't name it yet. "They're just colored paper," he said cautiously. Yes, the woman agreed, but people like to pretend the world is simple. She turned another postcard. This one showed a desert church with a white cross. Are you visiting? Simon asked, keeping his tone casual. The woman smiled faintly, as if amused by the question's uselessness. I live here, she said, for now. Whitcomb called Simon's name from across the pharmacy. Simon started to step away, then hesitated. Do you have a favorite? He asked, nodding at the postcards. A favorite sunset. The woman's smile widened just a fraction. There's a place, she said softly, where the sun sets behind the mountains as if it's being swallowed. The light goes red, like blood in water, very dramatic. And where is this place? Simon asked, heart beating a little too fast. She looked at him fully now. At the old bridge by the river, she said, if you're ever free to walk alone. Whitcomb approached, brows furrowed. Doc, we gotta go, he said. Simon nodded, picked up a random postcard, one of a bland adobe street, and paid for it without looking at the price. As they left, he glanced back. The woman was already walking away, her steps unhurried. Whitcomb grunted. Pretty one, he said. You got a thing for locals? Simon swallowed. She wasn't local, he said, though he didn't know how he knew. Not really. Whitcomb shrugged. Everybody's from somewhere else now. Back on the hill that night, Simon sat at his desk with the postcard in front of him. He turned it over. On the blank back, in the lower corner, someone had written a single line in neat, slanted handwriting. The river remembers what men forget. No signature. Simon stared at the words until his eyes blurred. In another life, another war, this would have been romantic, a secret admirer, a poetic invitation. Here in this place, it felt like a hand sliding into his coat pocket and closing around his throat. He stood, crossed to the window, and looked out at the dark mountains. A British physicist in an American secret city. A war that was ending and not ending. A new weapon that threatened to outlive the peace. In the corner of the room, his suitcase still sat, half unpacked, like an admission that he did not intend to stay. Simon took a deep breath, then opened a drawer and pulled out a notebook he had been given. Thick paper, government-stamped cover, meant for official work. He flipped to a blank page and began to write. Not the whole truth, just enough of it. And then carefully he wrote something that looked like a correction, an adjustment, a small difference that would be almost invisible to someone who didn't know exactly what to look for. A fraction misplaced, a sign flipped, a parameter nudged, slightly incorrect, the kind of error a tired man might make, the kind of error that would send a calculation down a long, wrong path before anyone noticed. He closed the notebook and sat back, pulse hammering. In London, he had once watched a man die because a code word was said in the wrong order. Here, a wrong number could do more than kill one man. It could kill time. And time, Simon told himself, was what he needed to save lives, or at least to try. 2 days later, he returned to Santa Fe. This time, he managed to slip away from Whitcomb for 10 minutes under the pretense of needing a barber. He walked quickly to the old bridge by the river, his heart thudding in his ears. The woman was there, leaning against the railing as if she had been waiting all her life. You came, she said without surprise. You invited me, Simon replied. Her gaze flicked over his face. I did not invite you, she corrected gently. I offered you a choice. Simon's mouth was dry. I don't know who you are, he said. The woman looked out over the river. The water moved slow and brown. My name here is Irene Volkova, she said. But names are like postcards, Dr. Caldwell. Pictures people send to each other to pretend they are connected. Simon stiffened at hearing his name. You know me, he said. I know what I need to know, she replied. You are in a place where very bright men are doing very dark work. My country is very interested. Simon's stomach tightened. Soviet. He had expected it, in the abstract. Everyone did. The rumors on the hill were thick with suspicion, like dust. But to have it stand in front of him in a scarf and a calm voice was something else. I'm British, Simon said. Irene's smile was thin. "And yet you are here," she said. "Allies, friends, is that what you call it?" Simon said nothing. Irene turned to face him. "Dr. Caldwell," she said softly, "you understand what you are part of. You understand the power. You understand that when the Americans have this, the war will end as they wish. And after the war—" She paused, letting the implication hang. "After the world will belong to the ones who hold the sun in their hands." Simon's hands clenched. "What do you want?" he asked. Irene's gaze did not flicker. "Information," she said. "Nothing more complicated than that. You will give it to me, and you will be helping to ensure balance. You will be helping to ensure that no one nation can threaten the world alone." Simon almost laughed. "Balance," he repeated. "You mean another race, another war?" Irene tilted her head. "Perhaps," she said, "or perhaps deterrence. We can argue philosophy all day. But you are a practical man, yes, a scientist. You know that in nature, power without counterpower is unstable." Simon's mind raced. This was the moment where a man made a decision that could not be unmade. This was the bridge where he stepped from citizen to traitor. He thought of Peter dead in a London street. He thought of the photographs of burned children from Hamburg. He thought of the way men in uniform spoke about targets as if they were arithmetic. He thought of the thing on the tower that would soon bloom like a white flower and turn the desert to glass. "Delay," he told himself, "delay." "I don't have what you think I have," he said. Irene's eyes softened, almost kindly. "You have your mind," she said, "and your access, and your ability to write down what you know." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I will not threaten you," she said. "Not now. But understand this. My people are not the only ones who will come asking. There are others. Germans, Americans, British. Everyone wants to own the future. You can pretend you are above it, or you can choose." Simon swallowed. "What choice?" he asked. Irene smiled again, and this time there was something almost sad in it. "The choice of who gets burned first," she said. The river moved on beneath them, indifferent. Simon reached into his coat pocket and felt the edge of the postcard. Colored paper, a souvenir, a message. He looked at Irene. "I can give you something," he said slowly. "But you must understand, I'm not doing it for your country." Irene's eyes narrowed slightly. "Then why?" she asked. Simon's throat tightened. "To buy time," he said. Irene watched him for a long moment. Then she nodded once. "Time," she repeated, "a very expensive currency." Simon pulled out a folded piece of paper, an official memo he had copied earlier, and held it between two fingers as if it were fragile. Irene did not reach for it immediately. "Tell me," she said softly, "do you believe you can steal time from the Americans without paying for it with blood?" Simon's mouth went dry. He handed her the paper. Irene took it, slid it into her handbag as casually as if it were lipstick, and then looked back at him with an expression that was almost, not quite, respect. "We will see," she said. Then she turned and walked away, leaving Simon on the bridge with the river and the weight of his own choice. He watched her go, and for the first time since he arrived on the hill, he felt something like control. He had done it. He had begun. And hidden inside the information Irene carried was a flaw so small it might never be noticed until it had cost months. Slightly incorrect. Just enough to slow the sun. 3. The German shadow. If Irene was a knife wrapped in velvet, Otto Kessler was a shadow that had learned to wear a face. Simon met him by accident, which is how the best traps are sprung. It happened in the Los Alamos mess hall on a Sunday afternoon, when the rules loosened slightly and people attempted, with awkward determination, to pretend they were still human. The mess hall was loud with forced cheer. A gramophone playing scratchy swing, children running between tables, men in shirt sleeves laughing too hard. Simon sat alone with a plate of overcooked meat, watching the room the way a man watches an unfamiliar animal. Someone slid into the seat across from him. Simon looked up, ready to tell the intruder to find another table, and found himself staring at a man with light brown hair, neat hands, and a face so unremarkable it was almost unsettling. The man wore civilian clothes, but they fit him too well. His shoes were polished in a way that suggested habit rather than vanity. "You're Caldwell," the man said in English that was excellent but not native. Simon's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "And you are?" he asked. The man smiled faintly. "Otto Keller," he said. "I work in supply. Occasionally I come up from Santa Fe." Simon felt his skin tighten. Supply men didn't just appear on the hill, not without names on lists, not without badges checked, and this man's eyes, calm, assessing, were not the eyes of someone who counted crates. "I don't believe we've met," Simon said. "No," Otto agreed, "but we have mutual acquaintances." Simon's heart thudded. He kept his expression neutral by force of will. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean," he said. Otto's smile did not change, but something in it cooled. "Dr. Caldwell," he said softly, "you are a man with friends in Europe, friends who write letters, friends who miss you." Simon's mouth went dry. He thought of the letter he had sent 2 weeks earlier, addressed to an old colleague in Zurich, a man named Professor Adler, whom Simon had not spoken to in years. The letter had been ordinary on its face, polite inquiries, harmless academic remarks, a mention of the weather. But hidden in the letter, in the spacing of sentences, in the first letters of paragraphs, was a different message, a description of progress at Los Alamos, a glimpse of the shape of the work. And inside that description, again, Simon had planted tiny errors, like mites in flour. He had done it not because he wanted to help Germany, God, no, but because he believed Germany too must be delayed, because if Germany believed they were behind, perhaps they would not throw themselves into a last, desperate lunge. Because if Germany chased the wrong numbers, they would waste time and resources they did not have. It had seemed in the solitude of his room like another lever he could pull to slow disaster. Now the lever had pulled back. "I don't know any Professor Adler," Simon said, forcing a small laugh. Otto's eyes glinted. "You do," he said. "You wrote to him, very politely. Your English is charming even on paper." Simon's fingers tightened around his fork. Otto leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice so it was swallowed by the noise around them. "Your letter reached Zurich," Otto said. "It was forwarded. Someone read it with great interest." Simon swallowed. "Who?" he asked, though he already knew. Otto's smile widened, showing teeth briefly. It was not friendly. "Men who do not like losing wars," he said. "Men who believe science can change fate if given enough time." Simon's stomach turned. "You're German," he said quietly. Otto shrugged. "I am many things," he said. "German by birth, a businessman by necessity, a man with a talent for being in the right place." Simon's mind raced. If Otto exposed him, if Otto spoke to American security, Simon would be arrested before nightfall. The Americans did not distinguish between a man leaking to Germans with wrong numbers and a man leaking with correct ones. Treason was treason. Intent didn't matter. "You want something?" Simon said, voice tight. Otto nodded. "Yes," he said simply. "More letters, more information, and perhaps—" He paused, letting the implication hang. "Perhaps more accuracy." Simon's pulse hammered. "They won't win," Simon said, unable to stop himself. "Germany is finished." Otto's eyes remained calm. "Perhaps," he said. "Perhaps not. But finished men do dangerous things. If you believe Germany is finished, then you understand why a weapon like this—" He did not say bomb. He did not need to. "Might be of interest." Simon felt cold. "Why come to me?" he asked. "Why not find your own source?" Otto's gaze sharpened. "Because you are already halfway," he said. "You have already stepped off the safe path. You have already written. You have already chosen to play games with information. And men who play games are useful." Simon's throat tightened. "I didn't do it for you," he said. Otto's smile returned, thin and amused. "No," he agreed. "You did it for yourself." He leaned back, glancing around as if admiring the forced cheer of the mess hall. "I understand," Otto said almost conversationally, "that the Americans believe they are building something that will end wars. Perhaps they are right, but perhaps they are only building something that will make wars faster." Simon's mind flashed to Irene's words about the world belonging to those who held the sun. Otto turned back to him. "You are British," Otto said. "Your country is proud. It has been bombed. It has bled. Do you really want the Americans to emerge from this with a weapon that makes them gods?" Simon stared at him. Otto's voice softened, becoming almost sympathetic. "I am not asking you to betray your country," he said. "I am asking you to ensure your country is not made irrelevant." Simon felt something twist in him. Not patriotism exactly, but resentment. Britain had sacrificed. Britain had stood alone, and now America, fresh, wealthy, unscarred in its cities, would possess the ultimate weapon. It was not difficult to find bitterness. Otto watched the thought flicker across Simon's face, and his smile deepened. "I will give you a way to communicate," he said. "Safely. You will not write to Zurich again. That is too obvious now. You will leave a message in Santa Fe at a certain bookshop. You will receive payment, and you will be protected." Simon's mouth went dry. "Protected by whom?" he asked. Otto's eyes were flat. "By the people who read your letters," he said. Simon felt the room tilt. He realized with sudden clarity that he had invited this by trying to use Germany as a pawn. He had imagined a distant enemy, abstract and doomed. Instead, he had conjured a man who sat across from him eating overcooked meat and speaking softly about gods. Otto stood. "Think about it," he said, placing a hand briefly on Simon's shoulder, a gesture that felt like possession. "You will hear from me again." He walked away, blending into the crowd with unnerving ease. Simon sat frozen, the noise of the mess hall suddenly distant. A child laughed loudly somewhere. A gramophone needle skipped. Simon stared down at his plate, appetite gone, and felt the first true tremor of fear since arriving on the hill. He had wanted to slow the sun. Instead, he had drawn shadows closer. 4. The chessboard in the desert. Irene did not confront Simon immediately. That was what unsettled him most. Days passed, then a week. Work continued with its relentless rhythm. Meetings, chalkboards, arguments over variables and tolerances, whispered jokes about the army's obsession with fences. Simon wrote calculations, correct ones when others watched, slightly less correct ones when he could justify a margin. He learned how to camouflage doubt as caution. "Let's run it again," he would say, tapping a blackboard. "The assumptions may be too optimistic." No one argued with caution, not here, not with a device that could either fail spectacularly or succeed catastrophically. At night, Simon lay awake listening to the wind and the distant, faint sounds of trucks. He expected Irene to demand more. He expected her to praise him. He expected her to threaten him. Instead, silence. Then, one afternoon, a note appeared in his mailbox at the administration building, slipped among the official memos like a smuggled breath. It was a single sheet of plain paper, no stamp, no signature. "Tomorrow, Santa Fe, Plaza Cafe, noon. Bring your mind." Simon's stomach tightened. The next day, he took the earliest opportunity to go down the hill, using an excuse about needing to pick up replacement slide rules. Whitcomb escorted him again, bored and watchful. At the Plaza Cafe, Whitcomb sat at a table near the door with coffee, pretending to read a newspaper. Simon walked to the counter. Irene sat at a corner table, her scarf different this time, blue with small white flowers. She looked absurdly like a schoolteacher. She raised a hand slightly and Simon joined her. "Dr. Caldwell," she said pleasantly, "how is the mountain air?" "Thin," Simon said. Irene's eyes flicked to Whitcomb, then back. "He watches you?" she asked. "He watches everyone," Simon said. Irene nodded, as if this were merely a detail of weather. She stirred her coffee with a spoon, slow and deliberate. "I received your information," she said. "And?" Simon asked, trying to keep his voice light. Irene's spoon paused. "And it is interesting," she said. Simon felt his pulse quicken. "Interesting how?" he asked. Irene's gaze met his. "It does not match other sources," she said quietly. "We have other sources, Dr. Caldwell. Some of them are very good." Simon forced his face to remain blank. "I'm not sure what you mean," he said. Irene smiled faintly, as if humoring a child. You gave me calculations, she said, about the compression dynamics, about the timing, about the threshold conditions. She did not say critical mass. She did not need to. They are plausible, elegant even, but there are small inconsistencies. Simon's throat tightened. Perhaps I made an error, he said. Irene leaned forward slightly. Perhaps, she agreed. Or perhaps you wanted to make an error. Simon's mouth went dry. The cafe noise blurred. Whitcomb's newspaper rustled like distant leaves. Irene's voice remained calm, almost gentle. Tell me, she said, why would a British physicist risk everything to give my country information that is wrong? Simon stared at her. He could lie. He could pretend fatigue. He could pretend incompetence. But Irene's eyes were not the eyes of someone who could be fooled by easy lies. He tried the truth cautiously. Maybe, Simon said. I don't want anyone to have it too soon. Irene's gaze sharpened. Too soon, she repeated. You think you can control time? Simon swallowed. His hands were damp under the table. I think, he said, that if the weapon isn't ready before the war ends, it might not be used. Irene watched him for a long moment. Then she leaned back and laughed softly, one short, quiet laugh that held no humor. You are an idealist, she said. Simon's jaw tightened. I'm a scientist, he said. I know what this will do. Irene's expression softened, and for the first time Simon saw something like exhaustion behind her poise. My country has seen what war does, she said quietly. We have cities that are graves. We have children who have never known a day without hunger. You speak of ending war without using your weapon. That is easy for you to say on your safe hill. Simon flinched. It's not safe, he said, not inside. Irene's eyes held his. You want to delay, she said, to force negotiation, to give men time to become merciful. Yes, Simon said, surprising himself with how fiercely he meant it. Irene looked down at her coffee, then back up. And what if your delay means more people die with bullets and fire? She asked softly. What if your delay means the war drags on and more cities burn the old way? Are you certain your morality is clean? Simon felt as if she'd struck him. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Irene reached into her handbag and pulled out a small, worn chess set, travel size, pieces carved from cheap wood. She placed it on the table between them. Whitcomb glanced over, then returned to his newspaper. Do you play? Irene asked. Simon blinked. Yes, he said cautiously. A little. Good, Irene said. She opened the set and began placing pieces. As she arranged them, her hands moved with practiced ease. Chess is simple, she said. 2 sides, clear rules, time measured in moves. In war, people pretend it is like this. Simon watched her hands. And in reality? He asked. In reality, Irene said, the board is larger than you see, and the rules change when the powerful decide. She finished setting up the pieces and nodded at Simon. White or black? She asked. Simon hesitated. White, he said, taking the familiar comfort of the first move. Irene smiled. Of course, she murmured. They began. For a few minutes they spoke only of moves. Simon advanced a pawn. Irene responded without hesitation. He developed a knight. She mirrored with a bishop. The small wooden pieces clicked softly on the table, a domestic sound that felt obscene against the larger game they were playing. After 10 moves, Irene said casually, You have another visitor. Simon's hand froze above a knight. What? He murmured. A man, Irene said. German, perhaps. He approached you on the hill. You wrote a letter to Zurich. Simon's throat tightened. How do you... he began. Irene's eyes remained calm. We know many things, she said. We are not blind, Dr. Caldwell. Simon felt sweat break under his collar. I wrote no such letter, he lied. Irene's smile returned, thin and patient. Do not insult me, she said softly. I do not care about your letters to Germany except for one detail. She moved a pawn, taking his. What detail? Simon asked, voice tight. Irene's eyes lifted to his. If you are feeding wrong information to my country, she said, and also to Germany, then you are not a spy. You are something else. Simon swallowed. What? He asked. Irene tilted her head. A man who thinks he can manage the flood by moving sandbags, she said. A man who thinks he can delay a weapon by corrupting truth. Simon's jaw tightened. Is that a crime? He asked bitterly. Irene's gaze sharpened. It is, she said, if your corruption makes my country vulnerable. Simon stared at her. You want correct numbers, he said. Irene's face did not change, but her voice cooled. I want what is true, she said, because truth is power, and you are trying to steal power from everyone, like a thief who believes he is righteous. Simon felt anger flare. I'm trying to prevent, he began. Irene cut him off with a small motion of her hand. You are trying to prevent what you cannot prevent, she said quietly. The weapon will exist. If not today, then tomorrow. If not in America, then in Russia, or Germany, or Britain, or somewhere else. You cannot stop the sun from rising by covering your eyes. Simon's throat tightened. Then what? He asked, voice rough. Irene leaned forward slightly, her tone suddenly intimate. Then you decide, she said. Who will face it first? Simon felt cold. They played on. The chess game tightened. Simon made a risky move, sacrificing a pawn to gain position. Irene accepted the sacrifice, her expression unchanged. After another few moves, she said quietly, I could report you. Simon's hand trembled slightly as he moved a bishop. To whom? He asked. To your Americans, Irene said. To your British commander. To anyone. I could tell them you are leaking. I could tell them you are also corresponding with Germany. Simon's stomach lurched. You wouldn't, he said, though he knew she might. Irene's eyes remained steady. Why not? She asked. You risk my country's future for your conscience. Why should I protect you? Simon swallowed hard. What do you want? He asked again, voice lower. Irene moved her queen, cutting off his options. I want you to stop playing games, she said. If you give information, you give it correctly. If you do not, you stop. You do not poison the well, and then pretend you are saving thirsty children. Simon stared at the chessboard. His king was in danger. He could see the trap forming. He realized with sudden clarity that Irene was doing to him in miniature what she threatened to do in life. Checkmate was not a dramatic act. It was quiet, inevitable. A few simple moves. Simon looked up. If I refuse, he asked. Irene's smile was almost gentle. Then you will learn, she said softly, that time is not only something you can steal, it is also something that can be taken from you. Simon's breath caught. Outside the plaza was bright with New Mexico sun. Inside, on a small wooden board between two cups of coffee, the world's future shifted with each click of cheap carved pieces. Simon moved his king, escaping the immediate check. Irene nodded as if approving his instinct to survive. Good, she murmured. You understand at least that there is always another move. Simon stared at the board, then at Irene. He had wanted to delay the sun. Now he understood that the sun was watching back. 5. A margin called safety. Back on the hill, the work tightened like a noose. They were running out of time, not because anyone said so openly, but because the air had changed. The war in Europe was turning. The war in the Pacific was grinding on. Everyone spoke of urgency the way a priest speaks of sin. General Groves visited more often. Security patrols increased. A new counterintelligence officer, Major Daniel Pratt, began appearing in hallways and at the edges of meetings like a question with boots. Simon felt eyes on him everywhere. He adapted. He became outwardly what everyone expected. The British scientist, grateful for inclusion, eager to contribute, tired but loyal. He wrote letters home to his sister that said nothing. He wrote official reports that said only what they must. And he continued carefully to push for delay. His method was not dramatic sabotage. It was the quiet art of margins. In the theoretical group, they argued daily about tolerances, how precise the timing must be, how symmetrical the compression, How much variation could be allowed before the device became unreliable? Simon discovered that safety was a powerful word. So was uncertainty. These calculations, he would say, tapping the chalkboard, assume ideal behavior. But we are not dealing with ideals. We are dealing with manufacturing realities. If the lens timing drifts by even a small fraction, he would pause, let the others imagine failure. We should run another series of tests, he would conclude. It would be irresponsible not to. No one wanted to be the man whose optimism caused a dud. No one wanted to explain to Groves that the great weapon had failed because they had been impatient. So they ran more tests. Weeks bled. Simon knew he was walking a razor edge. Delay too much and people would begin to ask why. Delay too little and his whole moral gamble would be meaningless. He tried to measure time like a chemist measures poison. One afternoon, Mags Rowland cornered him in the hallway outside the chalk room. "You've been pushing for extra verification," she said without preamble. Simon forced a smile. "Verification is healthy." Mags's eyes narrowed. "Healthy," she repeated. "Or convenient." Simon felt his heartbeat quicken. Mags was too sharp, too observant. She had the dangerous habit of noticing patterns in people the way she noticed patterns in numbers. "I don't know what you're implying," Simon said. Mags leaned closer, lowering her voice. "I'm implying," she said, "that you're either the most cautious man on this hill or you're trying to slow us down. And if you're trying to slow us down, you're either a saint or an idiot." Simon stared at her. "You think slowing down is idiotic?" he asked quietly. Mags's mouth tightened. "I think," she said, "that every day the war continues, people die. I have a cousin in the Pacific. He writes me letters that smell like mildew and fear. If this ends the war faster, I want it yesterday." Simon felt something twist inside him. "And if it ends the war by burning a city full of children?" he asked. Mags flinched just slightly. "Don't," she said. "Don't do that. Don't make me carry the whole moral weight. We didn't start this war. We're trying to finish it." Simon's jaw tightened. "Finish it," he echoed. "By inventing a new way to kill?" Mags's eyes hardened. "You're not the only one who thinks about it at night," she said sharply. "But thinking doesn't stop it. And your doubts won't stop it. The only thing your doubts might do is make it fail when they need it most." Simon swallowed. "Need it," he murmured. Mags leaned back, studying him. "Let me ask you something," she said quietly. "If you had a lever that could end the war tomorrow, but the lever would crush 1,000 people you've never met, would you pull it?" Simon felt his throat tighten. He thought of London. He thought of Dresden rumors. He thought of the photographs that sometimes slipped through censorship. 1,000? he asked. Mags's jaw clenched. "Or 100,000, she said, voice rough. "Pick your number. Would you pull it?" Simon stared at her. He did not answer. Mags's expression softened just slightly. "That's why I'm asking," she said quietly. "Because you're hesitating, and hesitation has consequences too." She walked away, leaving Simon in the hallway with the echo of her question. That evening, Simon received another note in his mailbox. This one was even simpler. "Bookshop. Tomorrow. Noon." No signature, but Simon recognized the neat slant of the handwriting. "Otto." His stomach tightened. He had not replied to Otto's approach in the mess hall. He had hoped, absurdly, that ignoring the shadow would make it fade. Instead, it had followed. The next day, Simon went down to Santa Fe again under the pretense of supply procurement. This time he felt eyes on him not only from Whitcomb, but from somewhere else. An awareness at the edges of his vision, as if he were being watched by someone who knew how to watch. At the bookshop, Whitcomb waited outside. Simon stepped inside, breathing in the smell of paper and dust. The shop was quiet. A bell tinkled as he entered. An elderly woman behind the counter glanced up, then returned to her reading without interest. Simon moved toward a shelf labeled European History, as if that were why he had come. A hand brushed his elbow, light as a passing breeze. Otto's voice, barely audible, said, "Walk to the back." Simon's skin crawled. He obeyed, moving through narrow aisles to a corner where old maps were displayed. Otto stood there examining a map of the world as if it were a puzzle. "You did not respond," Otto said softly, without looking at him. "I had nothing to say," Simon replied, voice tight. Otto's eyes flicked to him. "You are being watched," Otto said calmly. "Not by your soldier friend, by men who are more skilled." Simon felt cold. "American security?" he asked. Otto nodded slightly. "They are nervous," he said. "There have been irregularities, delays, missing papers. They do not like uncertainty." Simon's stomach lurched. He forced his voice steady. "What do you want?" Otto smiled faintly. "The same as before," he said. "Information, more, better." Simon's jaw clenched. "You already have—" Otto cut him off with a small tilt of his head. "You have given us crumbs," he said. "And some of those crumbs are stale." Simon's pulse quickened. He realized Otto, too, had noticed the errors. Otto stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Do you think you are clever?" Otto asked softly. "Do you think you can feed lies to wolves and remain their shepherd?" Simon swallowed. "What do you want from me?" he asked again. Otto's smile faded, and his eyes hardened. "I want," he said, "to know whether you are an ally or an enemy. Because if you are an enemy, then you are a danger, and dangers are removed." Simon's breath caught. "You would kill me," he said. Otto's face remained calm. "Perhaps," he said. "Or perhaps I would simply tell your Americans what you have been doing. That would be slower and more humiliating, but effective." Simon's hands clenched. "You can't," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Otto's gaze flicked to the counter where the old woman sat reading. "She is not my only contact," Otto said softly. "Do not be naive." Simon felt trapped between two predators. Irene demanding truth, Otto demanding loyalty, Americans demanding silence. Delay, his chosen weapon, began to feel less like morality and more like a noose tightening around his own neck. Otto leaned closer. "You will meet me again," he said. "Soon, and you will decide." He stepped away, blending into the shelves as if he had never been there. Simon left the shop with a thin book in his hand that he did not remember picking up. Outside, Whitcomb glanced at it and grunted. "History, huh? You Brits love your history." Simon forced a weak smile. "Yes," he said. He looked down at the book's cover. It was a volume of essays on diplomacy, thin, earnest, hopeful. A book about negotiation, a book about men believing words could change wars. Simon felt his throat tighten. He had been trying to buy time for diplomacy. Now diplomacy seemed like a ghost story told to children. Above him, the sun burned indifferent, and Simon wondered how long he could keep delaying before the game swallowed him whole. 6. Check and countercheck. Major Daniel Pratt introduced himself to Simon as if they were being polite at a dinner party. It happened in the theoretical building after a long day of calculations that left Simon's eyes gritty and his mind buzzing. Simon was leaving when he saw the Major leaning against the hallway wall, arms folded, as if he had been part of the architecture all along. Pratt was in his late 30s, hair cropped close, face clean-shaven, eyes sharp with a kind of casual menace. He wore his uniform like a second skin. "Dr. Caldwell," Pratt said, smiling slightly. "Mind if I have a word?" Simon's stomach tightened. "Of course," he said, forcing calm. Pratt pushed off the wall and walked beside Simon as if they were simply strolling. "How are you finding life on the hill?" Pratt asked pleasantly. Simon kept his voice light. "Dry?" Pratt chuckled. "Yes, dry. People complain about the food, the housing, the fences. Nobody complains about the work." Simon said nothing. Pratt's voice remained conversational. "You're part of the British mission," Pratt said. "We're grateful for your contribution. I'm sure you know General Groves values British cooperation." Simon nodded. Pratt stopped walking and turned to face him. "We've had some security concerns," Pratt said, still smiling. "Nothing alarming. Just irregularities." Simon felt his pulse quicken. "What sort of irregularities?" he asked, as if curious rather than terrified. Pratt's eyes held his. Documents out of place, he said. Calculations that don't align. People seen in places they shouldn't be. Small things. Simon forced his face to remain blank. People make mistakes, he said carefully. Pratt nodded. People do, he agreed. Sometimes mistakes are mistakes. Sometimes mistakes are messages. Simon swallowed. Pratt leaned closer slightly, lowering his voice. You know, he said softly, we had a case in Washington. A clerk, very ordinary man. He copied supply schedules and sent them to someone, not because he cared about the Germans or the Russians, because he was in debt, wanted money, wanted to feel important. Pratt's smile was thin. We found him, he continued. He said he didn't mean harm. He said he only wanted, what did he say? A little more time. Time to fix his life. Simon's throat tightened. What happened to him? He asked, voice steady by force. Pratt's eyes remained calm. He's in a military prison, he said. He'll likely be executed. The point is... He paused. The point is, intentions don't matter much to the people with guns. Simon held Pratt's gaze. I don't know why you're telling me this, he said, though he did. Pratt's smile returned, almost friendly. I'm telling you, he said, because you seem like an intelligent man, and intelligent men sometimes think they can play complicated games. Simon felt sweat at the back of his neck. I play chess, he said quietly before he could stop himself. Pratt's eyebrows rose slightly. Do you? He said. I do too. Not well, but I know one thing about chess. Simon said nothing. Pratt's smile sharpened. Eventually, he said softly, someone loses. He patted Simon's shoulder, the gesture heavy with implication, and walked away. Simon stood still, heart pounding. Behind him, a door opened and closed. A laugh echoed from somewhere down the hallway. Life on the hill continued as if it did not notice threats. That night, Simon went to see Commander Larkin. Larkin's office smelled of pipe tobacco and paper. A photograph of a ship hung on the wall, an artifact from a life Larkin no longer lived. Larkin looked up as Simon entered. You look like a man who has seen a ghost, Larkin said. I've seen an American with a badge, Simon replied, closing the door behind him. Larkin's face tightened. Pratt? He asked. Simon nodded. What did he say? Larkin demanded. Simon hesitated. How much could he tell? If he confessed his leaks, Larkin would have him arrested or shipped back to Britain in chains. Simon chose the edge of truth. He suspects irregularities, Simon said. Delays, mistakes. Larkin's gaze sharpened. Are there mistakes? He asked. Simon met his eyes, and for a moment the room held only silence and the weight of unsaid things. Sometimes, Simon said carefully, it is hard to know whether caution is a mistake. Larkin's jaw clenched. Don't play riddles with me, he snapped. What have you done, Caldwell? Simon swallowed. I'm trying, he said quietly, to prevent something worse. Larkin stared at him, anger flaring. You think you're the only one with a conscience? Larkin hissed. You think the rest of us are eager to drop a new sun on a city? Christ. Simon flinched. Then help me, Simon said, surprising himself with the plea. Larkin's eyes hardened. Help you do what? He demanded. Sabotage the project? Undermine our alliance? Hand advantage to the Soviets? To the Germans? Simon's breath caught. I'm not handing advantage, he said desperately. I'm trying to slow everyone, to make the weapon arrive too late to be used. Larkin stared at him as if he had spoken madness. You cannot make it arrive too late, Larkin said, voice low. Even if you delay it here, it will be built somewhere else. And if you delay it here enough, you risk losing the war. Simon felt something crack inside him. Losing the war? He echoed. Germany is collapsing. Japan will... Larkin cut him off sharply. Japan will fight until they are ash, he said, and you know it, and the Americans know it. That's why they're doing this. Simon's hands clenched. And what about after? He asked, voice rough. After the war? When this weapon exists? When no city is safe? When diplomacy becomes hostage to whoever has the biggest sun? Larkin's face tightened, and for a moment his anger faltered. That, he said quietly, is a problem for after. Simon stared at him. That's what everyone says, Simon whispered, until after becomes now. Larkin rubbed a hand over his face. You can't, he said, voice weary now. You can't do what you're thinking. You'll be caught. You'll be executed. And you'll accomplish nothing except making us distrust the British, making Americans tighten secrecy, making everything worse. Simon's throat tightened. What if I can delay it just enough? He asked. What if just enough time matters? Larkin's eyes searched his face. You're not asking me about strategy, Larkin said slowly. You're asking me about salvation. Simon said nothing because the word fit too well. Larkin leaned back in his chair, exhaling smoke. Listen, he said, voice lower. If you are doing something reckless, stop, for your sake, for our sake. If you have moral objections, write them down in a diary and burn it, but do not become a traitor for the sake of your conscience. Simon felt tears prick behind his eyes. Not sadness, but furious frustration. I'm already a traitor, he thought, but he did not say it. He stood. Thank you, he said stiffly and turned toward the door. Larkin's voice stopped him. Caldwell, Larkin said quietly. Whatever you think you're delaying, the sun doesn't care. Simon paused, hand on the door handle. It will, Simon said softly, if I can keep men from calling it down. He left, closing the door behind him. In the darkness of his quarters later, Simon lay awake, hearing Pratt's voice. Eventually, someone loses. And somewhere beneath that, Irene's quieter voice. Time is not only something you can steal, it is also something that can be taken from you. The game was tightening, and Simon began to suspect that his own side of the board was smaller than he had imagined. 7. The dead drop. The note came slipped under Simon's door like a blade. No stamp, no signature. Tomorrow, church, evening, come alone. Irene. Simon stared at it in the dim light of his room. Come alone was an absurd instruction in a world where no one was ever alone. But Irene's notes were never literal. They were tests as much as invitations. Simon folded the note and placed it in his pocket, then sat at his desk and stared at a page of calculations until the symbols blurred into meaningless shapes. He thought of Otto's threat. He thought of Pratt's warning. He thought of the way Larkin had looked at him, angry, frightened, almost pitying. He thought of the moral lever he had imagined. The lever was now attached to a machine that did not care who pulled it. The next evening, Simon went down the hill to Santa Fe on a scheduled supply run, choosing the one opportunity that would not raise immediate suspicion. Whitcomb was assigned again, grumbling as always. Why do we gotta go at night? Whitcomb complained as they drove. Supplies, Simon said. Whitcomb snorted. Supplies! Everything's supplies. Even secrets. The church Irene had mentioned was small and white, sitting on the edge of town like a memory. Its doors were open and inside candles burned, flickering against adobe walls. A few people sat in pews, heads bowed. Whitcomb, uncomfortable, stayed outside near the jeep, smoking. Simon stepped inside. The air smelled of wax and dust. The quiet pressed in. Irene sat in the back pew, hands folded, head bowed as if in prayer. Simon slid into the pew beside her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Irene said softly, without looking at him, You are being followed. Simon's heart tightened. I know, he murmured. Irene's eyes remained on the altar. Not only by Americans, she said. Someone else. Simon swallowed. German, he said quietly. Irene's mouth tightened. Yes, she said. You have invited many players to your board. Simon felt anger flare. I did not invite him, he hissed. Irene's gaze flicked toward him, sharp. You wrote letters, she said. You opened doors. Simon clenched his hands. What do you want? He whispered. Irene exhaled slowly. I want to know, she said, whether you understand how close you are to losing control. Simon stared at her, then looked forward again, as if the altar could offer answers. I never had control, he said quietly. Irene's voice softened. You believed you could delay, she said. You believed you could force negotiation. Perhaps you still believe this. Simon swallowed. I do, he said. Or I try to. Irene leaned closer, her voice barely audible. Then you must choose one channel, she said. One. You cannot feed lies to all and hope none bite you. Simon's throat tightened. I don't want anyone to build it, he said. Irene's eyes hardened. They will, she said simply. The question is, who will build it first and who will be naked when it arrives? Simon looked at her, frustration sharp. And what do you want? He asked bitterly. For your country to have it too? Irene's gaze did not flicker. Yes, she said, so that America cannot use it without fear. Simon felt cold. That's not peace, he whispered. Irene's expression softened, and for a moment Simon saw a flicker of something human. Pain, perhaps. It is survival, she said quietly. They sat in silence as a priest moved quietly at the front of the church, his murmured Latin a soft, incomprehensible river. Then Irene reached into her handbag and pulled out a small envelope. She slid it towards Simon along the pew. In this, she whispered, is a request from my superiors, a specific question. If you answer correctly, you will prove you are not deceiving us. If you answer incorrectly again, they will decide you are an enemy. Simon stared at the envelope. His mouth went dry. You're threatening me, he whispered. Irene's eyes held his. I am warning you, she said. There is a difference. Simon's hands trembled slightly as he took the envelope. He did not open it yet. Outside, Whitcomb's cigarette glowed faintly in the dark. Simon looked at Irene. What happens if I refuse? He whispered. Irene's face was calm, but her voice was edged. Then they will find another way, she said. Perhaps through someone else on the hill, perhaps through more forceful methods. Simon felt dread. You mean kidnapping, he said. Irene's eyes did not blink. I mean, she said softly, that you are not as unique as you believe. Simon swallowed. He glanced down at the envelope, heavy as sin in his hand. If I answer, he whispered, I give you truth. I give you power. Irene's gaze sharpened. And if you do not, she said, you give America monopoly. You give Otto's people desperation. You give the world imbalance. Simon felt trapped, squeezed between philosophies and threats. He looked forward at the altar. Candles flickered. The priest's murmurs continued. Simon thought of the world as a chessboard, of pieces moved by unseen hands, of kings protected by pawns who died without understanding why. I need time, he whispered. Irene's smile was thin. Time, she murmured. Always time. She rose smoothly as if prayer had concluded. Tomorrow, she said softly, at the river bridge. Then she walked away, leaving Simon alone in the pew with the envelope. As the church door closed behind her, Simon realized how much he relied on her presence, even as a threat. Because her presence meant the game still had rules. Outside, Whitcomb flicked ash from his cigarette. Done? He asked. Simon nodded, voice hoarse. Done, he said. On the drive back to Los Alamos, Simon felt the weight of the envelope in his pocket like a second heartbeat. He did not open it in the jeep. He waited until he was alone in his room. Then he sat at his desk, lit a forbidden cigarette, and tore open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a question written in Irene's neat hand. Careful, exact. It was technical, specific, not something that could be answered with vague generalities. Simon stared at it, cigarette smoke curling toward the ceiling. If he answered truthfully, he would give Irene's country what it needed to move faster, to match America. If he answered falsely again, he would provoke retaliation, perhaps exposure, perhaps violence. And if he refused entirely, Irene would move on to another source, someone less conflicted, someone more loyal, someone who would not plant poison in the numbers. Simon sat very still. Then he did something that surprised him. He laughed. It was a dry, bitter sound that held no humor. He had believed he could delay the sun. Now he understood. The sun was rising, and all he could do was decide what shadows it cast. He folded the question and slipped it into a book, then stood and walked to the window. Outside, the hill was dark, dotted with the faint glow of lamps. Somewhere men worked late, running experiments. Somewhere soldiers walked fences with rifles. Somewhere Pratt watched lists and patterns. And somewhere below in Santa Fe, Otto and Irene watched him from opposite sides of the board. Simon pressed his forehead to the cold glass and whispered into the night, as if the desert might answer, "How many lives is a week worth?" No answer came. 8? A move too far. The next day, Simon went to the river bridge as instructed. He told Whitcomb he needed to visit a hardware store for specific tools, and Whitcomb, bored, eager for any excuse to escape the hill, agreed. At the bridge, Simon stepped out of the jeep. Whitcomb stayed with the vehicle, smoking and watching the road. Simon walked to the railing and looked down at the slow brown water. Irene stood a few paces away, facing the river, her scarf pulled tighter against the wind. "You look tired," she said without turning. "I didn't sleep," Simon replied. Irene glanced at him. "Because of my question," she said. Simon nodded. "It was very precise," he said. "It needed to be," Irene replied. Simon's throat tightened. "I can answer," he said. Irene's eyes sharpened. "And will you?" she asked. Simon hesitated. "I need something first," he said quietly. Irene's gaze hardened. "You are not in a position to bargain," she said. Simon's jaw clenched. "I need to know," he said, voice low, "that if I give you truth, you won't hand it to someone who will use it to threaten the world." Irene stared at him, incredulous. "You think you can demand ethics from intelligence?" she asked softly. "From war?" Simon felt anger flare. "You demanded ethics from me," he said. "You demanded truth. You demanded I stop poisoning information. If truth is power, then you are asking me to give you power. I want to know what you'll do with it." Irene's mouth tightened. Her eyes flicked briefly to Whitcomb by the jeep, then back. "You are naive," she said. Simon's voice tightened. "Perhaps," he said. "But answer anyway." Irene studied him for a long moment. Then she exhaled slowly. "My superiors," she said quietly, "do not care about your morality. They care about my results. They care about ensuring that America cannot threaten us." Simon nodded once. "So you will build it," he said softly. Irene's gaze remained steady. "Yes," she said, "eventually, with or without you." Simon swallowed. "And Germany?" he asked quietly. Irene's eyes narrowed. "Germany is collapsing," she said. "It is not the future." Simon's jaw clenched. "It might be if desperation does something insane," he said. Irene's voice hardened. "What are you asking?" she said sharply. Simon hesitated, then took a breath. "I'm asking you," he said, "to help me shut down the German channel." Irene stared at him, surprise flickering. "You want me to protect you from the Germans," she said. Simon shook his head. "No," he said. "I want you to protect the world from them. Otto, Keller, he knows I've been sending letters. He knows there are errors. He's pressing me, threatening me." Irene's eyes sharpened. "You told him nothing more?" she asked. "No," Simon said, voice tight. "But he wants more. And if he exposes me, if he tells the Americans, I'm finished, and everything becomes tighter. No diplomacy, no debate, just speed and suspicion." Irene's gaze was cold. "You invited him," she said again. Simon's jaw clenched. "Yes," he admitted, "and I regret it. So, can you help me remove him?" Irene stared at him for a long moment, face unreadable. Then she said quietly, "Perhaps." Simon's heart tightened. "Perhaps," he pressed. Irene's eyes were flat. "I can tell my people," she said. "They may be able to discourage him." Simon felt a chill. "Discourage," he repeated. Irene's gaze did not soften. You want him gone, she said. Gone is gone. Simon swallowed hard. He had imagined chess moves, quiet maneuvers, delays. Now he was asking for something darker. I want him stopped, Simon said carefully. Irene nodded once. Then answer my question, she said, voice low. Give me what I need, and perhaps my people will do what you want. Simon stared at her, horror and necessity tangling, and he felt the world narrowing to a series of trades, truth for protection, power for mercy. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, the answer he had written the night before. He had written it in two versions, one true, one slightly wrong. He had stared at them for hours, cigarette burning down, smoke thick in his room. In the end, he had chosen something that felt like a compromise and tasted like ash, a truth that was incomplete, accurate in principle, but missing the detail that made it immediately useful. He had told himself it was still delay. He had told himself it might still save lives. Now, holding the paper, he wondered if he was only lying to himself. He handed it to Irene. She took it, unfolded it, and read. Her eyes moved across the page quickly, taking in symbols and words. She looked up. You have not lied, she said quietly. Simon's stomach tightened. Not entirely, he admitted. Irene's gaze sharpened, but she did not accuse. Instead, she folded the paper and slipped it into her handbag. You are learning, she said softly. Good. Simon felt no satisfaction. He only felt heavier. Irene looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, Meet me tomorrow night, same cafe, come alone. Simon's throat tightened. Why? He asked. Irene's eyes flicked toward Whitcomb again, then back. To discuss Otto, she said. Then she turned and walked away, leaving Simon at the bridge with the river and the feeling that he had just paid for something he did not yet understand. The next day, on the hill, disaster arrived, disguised as routine. In the afternoon, Pratt's men raided the theoretical building. They did it quietly. No shouting, no dramatic arrests. Just soldiers in plain clothes moving through offices, opening drawers, gathering papers, asking questions with polite smiles that hid teeth. Simon sat at his desk as two men went through his notebooks. His heart hammered, but he kept his face calm. One of the men flipped through a stack of calculations, brow furrowed. These are yours? The man asked. Yes, Simon said, voice steady. The man nodded, then tapped a page. This correction here, he said. Why? Simon leaned forward, forcing himself to look curious rather than panicked. That, he said, was a revision after we adjusted assumptions about manufacturing tolerances. The man's eyes narrowed. Who requested the revision? He asked. Simon swallowed. Dr. Hart, he said, naming his supervisor. The man wrote something down. Then Pratt appeared in the doorway, smiling as if amused by bureaucracy. Dr. Caldwell, Pratt said pleasantly. Sorry for the inconvenience. Just routine. Simon forced a smile. Of course, he said. Pratt stepped closer, lowering his voice. Tell me, Pratt said. Have you been to Santa Fe often? Simon's stomach lurched. Occasionally, he said. For supplies. Pratt nodded. Simon's mouth went dry. Only shopkeepers, he said. Pratt's smile widened slightly. Shopkeepers, he repeated. Yes, they can be fascinating, especially the ones who ask a lot of questions. Simon held his gaze. I'm not sure what you're implying, Simon said. Pratt chuckled. Nothing, he said. Just conversation. He patted Simon's desk lightly, then turned to the men searching. Take what you need, Pratt said, voice louder now. Leave the rest. As Pratt left, Simon's hands clenched under the desk. He realized with sudden clarity, Pratt was closing in. The net was tightening. That evening, Simon went down to Santa Fe as instructed, heart pounding. Whitcomb was not assigned this time. Instead, a different escort, older, quieter, drove him. A man with the dead eyes of someone who had seen too much. Simon realized grimly that this was not a coincidence. The cafe was half empty. Irene sat in her usual corner, coffee untouched. Simon slid into the seat opposite her. You're watched, Irene said immediately. So are you, Simon replied. Irene's mouth tightened. Otto will not trouble you much longer. she said quietly. Simon's stomach tightened. "What did you do?" he asked, voice low. Irene's gaze held his. "I made a call," she said. "A message. He was careless enough to meet someone." Simon felt cold. "You had him killed," Simon whispered. Irene's face remained calm, but her eyes sharpened. "I did not kill him," she said. "I arranged that he could be removed." Simon's throat tightened. "Removed," he repeated. Irene leaned forward slightly. "You wanted him stopped," she said. "Do not pretend now that your hands are clean." Simon felt nausea rise. He looked away, jaw clenched. Outside the cafe window, people walked in the evening light, ordinary and unaware. "How?" Simon asked, voice tight. "How will he be removed?" Irene's eyes flicked toward the door. "Perhaps he will be arrested," she said softly. "Perhaps he will disappear. Perhaps his own people will decide he is more dangerous alive than dead." Simon stared at her. "You don't even know," he said. Irene's smile was thin. "I know enough," she said, "and you will know. Soon." Simon's hands trembled slightly. He felt the weight of the chessboard. Each move had consequences beyond imagination. "You're cold," he said quietly. Irene's expression softened just slightly. "I am alive," she replied. "There is a difference." Simon looked at her, seeing not just threat, but a woman shaped by war in ways he could not fully understand. He swallowed. "Pratt suspects," he said quietly. "He's searching. He's asking about Santa Fe." Irene's eyes narrowed. "Then you must be careful," she said. Simon laughed bitterly. "Careful," he whispered. "There is no careful anymore." Irene's gaze sharpened. "Then stop," she said quietly. "Stop leaking. Stop delaying. Finish your work and survive." Simon stared at her. "And let it happen?" he asked, voice rough. "Let them drop it." Irene's eyes held his. "They will," she said. "With or without your hesitation. Your delay may not save anyone. It may only destroy you." Simon felt the truth of it like a knife. He thought of Mags's question. Would you pull the lever? He thought of war continuing. He thought of cities burning. He thought of the weapon existing. And he thought of the small, stubborn hope that had driven him, that a week mattered. "I can't stop," he whispered. Irene's gaze was steady, almost pitying. "Then you will lose," she said softly. "Not because you are wrong, but because you are alone." Simon stared at her, and for the first time he felt the full loneliness of his position. In the chess game, he was not a king. He was a pawn who had begun to imagine himself a player. Outside, the sun lowered behind the mountains, bleeding red light across the sky. A postcard sunset, something you could not own, no matter how badly you wanted to. Irene watched the light, then looked back at Simon. "Tomorrow," she said. "I will send someone to contact you. Not me, someone else. If Pratt is close, my presence is too dangerous." Simon's stomach tightened. "You have someone else on the hill," he said. Irene's smile was thin. "We have many," she said. Simon felt a chill. Then Irene stood, scarf fluttering, and walked out of the cafe without looking back. Simon sat alone for a moment, staring at his hands. Then he rose and walked outside into the fading light. The escort waited by the car, expression blank. As they drove back up to Los Alamos, Simon looked out at the darkening landscape and wondered, grimly, if Otto was already gone, and if so, whether his disappearance had bought time or simply removed one more piece from a board where the endgame was already written. 9. The endgame begins. Otto vanished 2 days later. No announcement, no alarm, no body, just absence. Simon heard about it the way one hears about distant disasters, through murmurs. In the mess hall, a clerk mentioned that a supply man from Santa Fe hadn't returned. In the hallway, a soldier joked that someone took a wrong turn in the desert. Pratt's men looked sharper, more alert, as if the net had tightened and they could feel something caught in it. Simon said nothing. He did not ask questions, he did not go down the hill for a week, and still the feeling of being watched did not fade. One night, as Simon walked back to his quarters, he noticed a small object tucked under his door. A matchbook. He picked it up, heart pounding. The matchbook was from the Plaza Cafe in Santa Fe. On the inside cover, in tiny handwriting, were 2 words: library, midnight. Simon's stomach tightened. Irene had said someone else would contact him. This was it. Midnight on the hill was a quiet hour. Most people slept, exhausted. A few worked late, but the roads were empty. Simon left his room at 11:45, moving carefully, ears tuned for footsteps behind him. The library in Los Alamos was a small building filled with books no one had time to read. It smelled of dust and old paper. A single lamp burned near the front desk. Simon slipped inside. A woman sat at a table near the back, reading. At first glance, she looked like one of the secretaries. Plain dress, hair pinned, face tired. Then she looked up. It was not Irene. This woman's eyes were lighter, almost grey, and her expression was sharper. She closed her book and stood. "Dr. Caldwell," she said quietly. Simon swallowed. "And you are?" he asked. The woman smiled faintly. "Anna," she said. "That is enough." Simon's throat tightened. "You work for Irene," he said. Anna's smile did not change. "I work," she said, "for people who work for people. Irene is one branch. I am another." Simon felt cold. "What do you want?" he asked, voice low. Anna stepped closer, lowering her voice. "We have confirmed," she said quietly, "that you have been adjusting information." Simon's stomach tightened. "And?" he asked. Anna's gaze held his, flat and assessing. "And my superiors are not amused," she said. "They believe you are either incompetent or hostile." Simon swallowed hard. "I'm neither," he said. Anna's smile was thin. "Those are the only categories intelligence uses," she said. "Useful or dangerous." Simon's hands clenched. "I'm trying to prevent a catastrophe," he said, voice tight. Anna's eyes flicked briefly with something like curiosity. "You believe delay is salvation," she said softly. "Yes," Simon said, surprising himself with how fiercely he meant it. Anna studied him. "In Moscow," she said quietly, "they call men like you romantics. Romantics are admired when they win. When they lose, they are buried and forgotten." Simon felt his throat tighten. "Is that a threat?" he asked. Anna's voice remained calm. "It is information," she said. "I am very good at information." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. She held it out. "This," she said, "is a simple request. You will provide the missing detail from your last answer. You will provide it accurately. No omissions, no in principle." Simon stared at the paper as if it were radioactive. "And if I refuse?" he asked. Anna's eyes did not blink. "Then," she said softly, "your Americans will learn about your German correspondence. They will learn about your meetings in Santa Fe. They will learn you are a man who leaks." Simon felt bile rise. "You can't prove," he began. Anna cut him off with a slight tilt of her head. "I do not need to prove," she said. "I need only to suggest, to the right ears, with the right details. Americans are already nervous. Pratt is already searching. He wants a name to pin it on." Simon's mouth went dry. "You would sacrifice me?" he whispered. Anna's gaze was flat. "You are already sacrificed," she said. "You simply have not accepted it yet." Simon's hands trembled. He looked around the library. Empty shelves, dust, silence. He realized with sudden clarity that this was not a negotiation. It was check. He could give the detail, strengthen Soviet progress, perhaps ensure balance, perhaps accelerate the arms race. Or he could refuse, be exposed, be arrested, and likely executed, while the project continued without him, perhaps faster. Delay, his precious currency, would be lost entirely. He stared at the paper in Anna's hand. Then he did something unexpected. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small notebook. His private notebook, not official, not stamped. He opened it to a page of scribbles. Anna watched him, expression unreadable. Simon tore the page out, folded it once, and handed it to her. Anna took it, unfolded it, and read. Her eyes moved quickly. Then she looked up. "This is correct," she said. Simon swallowed. "Yes," he said hoarsely. Anna studied him. "You have chosen," she said softly. Simon felt no triumph, only dread. Anna folded the paper, slipped it into her bag, and looked at him with something like faint respect. "You may survive," she said quietly. Simon stared at her. "And Otto?" he asked before he could stop himself. Anna's eyes flicked briefly with amusement. "Otto was not your friend," she said. "He was removed." Simon's throat tightened. "You killed him," Simon whispered. Anna's smile was thin. "The world kills men like Otto," she said. "We only arranged the time." She turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing," she said. Simon's stomach tightened. Anna looked back at him. "You think delay is moral," she said. "Perhaps. But remember, every delay creates pressure. Pressure seeks release." She tapped her temple lightly. "Be careful," she said. "If you delay too long, the release may be uncontrolled." Then she walked out of the library, leaving Simon alone amid dusty shelves. Simon sank into a chair, shaking. He had given truth. Not fully, perhaps. He had still tried, in the way he always did, to hold something back. But Anna had demanded the missing piece, and he had given it. He felt as if he had betrayed not a nation, but his own hope. Because each time he gave truth to the Soviets, he accelerated the future he feared. Balance, Irene called it. Deterrence. A race. A cold peace built on mutual terror. Simon sat in the library until the lamp burned lower and the silence became unbearable. Then he returned to his quarters and lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling. He thought of the sunrise in the desert. He thought of the tower. He thought of the lever. He wondered with sudden despair whether he had ever been delaying the sun, or whether he had only been helping it rise in more hands. 10. Trinity. By July, the hill buzzed with a fevered certainty. They spoke now openly, still not in terms of bombs, still not in terms of cities, but with an urgency that sharpened every conversation. The device would be tested. Soon. Trinity was the name whispered like a prayer and a curse. Simon traveled with the group to the test site under tight security. The desert stretched vast and empty around them, a place that looked as if it had never known human ambition. They built the tower in the distance like a gallows for the sky. They ran cables. They checked instruments. They argued over last-minute details. Simon did his work with numb precision, hands moving, mind calculating as if he were simply part of a machine. In quiet moments, he wondered what his delays had accomplished. He had pushed for more tests. He had insisted on margins. He had planted tiny errors that had forced rechecks. He had slowed conversations with caution and doubt. But the tower stood anyway, and the war still raged in the Pacific. One evening, 2 nights before the test, Mags Rowland found Simon standing alone near the edge of the camp, looking out at the empty desert. She came up beside him, arms folded. "You look like hell," she said. Simon smiled faintly. "I've felt worse." Mags glanced at him. "Liar," she said softly. Simon said nothing. They stood in silence for a moment, listening to wind scratch at tents. Then Mags said quietly, "You ever wonder if we're doing the right thing?" Simon's chest tightened. "Every day," he admitted. Mags's jaw clenched. "I told myself," she said, voice rough, "that if it ends the war, it's worth it. But now that we're here, it feels different." Simon looked at her. "Because it's real," he said quietly. "Not numbers, not chalk, real." Mags stared out at the dark horizon. "My cousin wrote me again," she said. "From Okinawa. He said they're burning villages, not just fighting. Burning. He said he can't sleep because he can still smell it." Simon felt sick. "And you think this will stop that?" he said softly. Mags's mouth tightened. "I hope," she said. "God, I hope." Simon swallowed. "If it works," he said quietly, "it will stop one kind of burning and begin another." Mags glanced at him sharply. "You've been talking like that for months," she said. Like you're bracing for something. Simon forced a weak smile. Maybe I'm just British, he said. Mag studied him, then shook her head. No, she said. This isn't just British gloom. This is guilt. Simon's throat tightened. Mags, he began. She cut him off, voice low. Tell me, she said, if you had the chance to slow this down, if you could push it back a month, would you? Simon's heart thudded. He thought of Irene, of Anna, of Otto's disappearance, of Pratt's searching eyes. He thought of the war dragging on, of Okinawa, of villages burning. He thought of Hiroshima, though he did not know the name yet, only that some city somewhere would be chosen. He thought of his brother's body in a London street. He swallowed. Yes, he said quietly, I would. Mag stared at him. Why? She asked, voice rough. Simon's throat tightened. Because, he whispered, I want the war to end before this exists, before anyone can justify using it. Mags's eyes narrowed. And if the war doesn't end, she asked, if slowing it down means more boys like my cousin die? Simon flinched. I don't know, he admitted. That's the horror. Every choice kills. Mag stared at him for a long moment. Then she said quietly, You're not the only one who wished for delay. Simon looked at her. What? He asked. Mags exhaled slowly. There was a meeting, she said softly. Some of the scientists, talking about petitions, demonstrations. They're arguing about whether we should warn Japan, whether we should do a test on an empty island, whether we should, she swallowed, whether we should refuse. Simon's heart tightened. And? He asked. Mags shook her head. Groves would crush it, she said, and even if he didn't, the politicians will do what they want. We're just tools. Simon stared at her. Tools, he echoed. Mags looked at him, eyes glinting. You ever think, she said quietly, that the only thing we can control is whether we lie to ourselves about it? Simon felt something break in him, a quiet crack of resignation. He looked out at the dark desert. 2 nights later, before dawn, he stood with the others at the observation site. The wind was cold, the sky was black, stars sharp. The tower waited in the distance. The voice on the line began its slow, relentless countdown. Simon's hands shook, cigarette unlit. He looked at the horizon, still dark, and felt an irrational urge to beg the sun not to rise. Mags stood beside him, her hand briefly brushing his sleeve. Somewhere behind them, men spoke in clipped tones. Instruments hummed. A generator coughed. The voice said, 10 seconds. Simon's heart hammered. He thought of the numbers he had altered. Had his delays mattered? Had his poison in the margins bought anyone anything? The voice said, 3, 2, 1. For a fraction of a moment, nothing happened. Then the world became light. Not bright, not dazzling, light as a force, a violence, a command. The desert flared white, turning the night into an obscene day. Simon's eyes watered even behind dark goggles. Heat hit his face like an open hand. The horizon bloomed with a sphere of fire that rose and expanded and climbed, as if the earth had decided to show its own heart. A shockwave followed, delayed by distance like thunder chasing lightning. The ground trembled. Mags gasped, a sound half awe, half grief. Someone behind Simon whispered, My God. Simon could not speak. He watched the fireball rise and flatten into a shape that would become a symbol for a century. He watched the sky bruise with color, purple, orange, dirty red. He watched as the new sun burned, and he realized with a clarity that felt like despair that no amount of delay could erase what had just been proved possible. The sun had risen on command. Men could do it now. Afterward, in the stunned quiet, people began to talk. Voices shaky, laughter too loud, relief and horror mingling. Simon stood apart, feeling emptied. A man approached him. Dr. Hart, his supervisor, eyes bright with triumph and exhaustion. Caldwell, Hart exclaimed, clapping him on the shoulder. It worked, it bloody worked. Simon forced a smile. Yes, he said hoarsely, it worked. Hart grinned, eyes shining. This ends it, Hart said. This ends the war. Simon stared at him. Does it? Simon whispered. Hart's smile faltered slightly. "What?" he asked. Simon swallowed, then shook his head. "Nothing," he said. "Nothing." Later that day, as the camp buzzed with stunned energy, Simon sat alone in his tent, writing a letter. Not to his sister, not to Larkin, to no one. A confession addressed to time itself. He wrote, "I tried to delay you. I tried to steal you. I thought if I could buy enough of you, men might become better. But men did not become better. They became more capable." He stopped, staring at the page. Then he crumpled it, lit a match, and burned it in a tin cup, watching the words curl into ash. The world did not need his confession. It already had its new sun. 2 weeks later, the first city burned. Simon heard about it on the hill, through guarded announcements and whispered rumors that carried horror between syllables. Then a second city. Then, suddenly, surrender. The war ended as people had promised, faster than anyone had dared hope. And yet, in the quiet after, Simon could not feel relief. He felt only a strange, hollow curiosity. How many lives had a week been worth? How many lives had his delays saved? And how many lives had his truth given to Irene's people, doomed in some future he could not yet see? One afternoon, as he packed his belongings to leave Los Alamos, Simon found a folded postcard tucked into his suitcase. It was the same image as before, mountains swallowing the sun in red light. On the back, in neat handwriting, were 5 words. The sun rose anyway. Always. No signature. Simon stared at the words until his eyes blurred. Then, beneath the line, someone had added a second sentence, smaller, as if written as an afterthought. But you moved its shadow. Simon sat on the edge of his bed, postcard in his hands, and finally allowed himself to feel it. Not triumph, not absolution, but the smallest, strangest thing. A sliver of meaning. Delay had not stopped the sun, but perhaps it had changed which faces were burned first. He closed his eyes, hearing the echo of Irene's voice, Anna's warning, Mags's question, Pratt's threat, Otto's soft menace. He heard his brother's laughter in a Cambridge dawn. He opened his eyes. Outside, the New Mexico sky was a hard blue, indifferent and endless. Simon Caldwell stood, placed the postcard carefully into his pocket, and walked out into a world that had learned it could command dawn. Epilogue: The question that remains. Years later, long after Los Alamos became a name whispered in newspapers rather than only in fenced corridors, Simon sat in a small office in Cambridge with rain at the windows and students in the hallway. He was older, thinner, his hair grayer. He had returned to teaching and tried, in the way men do, to make normal life look convincing. On his desk lay a newspaper. A headline announced that another nation had tested a device, the world's second sun. Simon stared at the headline for a long time. Then he reached into a drawer and pulled out a postcard, a faded image of a desert sunset. He turned it over. "But you moved its shadow." Simon traced the words with one finger. He thought of Irene. He did not know if she had survived the purges and the internal wars of her own system. He did not know if she had been rewarded or discarded. He did not know if she had ever regretted anything. He thought of Otto, vanished into the desert like a ghost. He thought of Pratt, whose threats had been as inevitable as gravity. He thought of Mags, who had written him once after the war, a letter full of cautious affection and unspoken pain. She had married. She had had children. She had stopped writing after the first Soviet test, as if words could no longer carry what they once had. Simon leaned back in his chair. Outside, rain slid down the glass. He thought of his question, the one he had asked the desert and never answered. Can delay itself be a moral act? He had delayed, and the bomb had still fallen. He had delayed, and the war had ended. He had delayed, and the race had begun anyway. Was it worth it? He did not know, but he knew this. The world that followed Trinity was not the world that existed before it. And if he had done nothing, if he had merely calculated and nodded and helped raise the sun without resistance, he would have been a different kind of traitor. To himself, to whatever remained of his brother's laughter, to the fragile human hope that time could be used for mercy. Simon picked up his pen and began to write a lecture note for tomorrow's class, on the elegance of equations and the dangers of certainty. In the margin, almost without thinking, he wrote a single line: "Time is the only weapon that cuts both ways." He stared at it, then underlined it twice. Outside, the rain continued, and somewhere beyond the clouds, indifferent as ever, the real sun rose, an old liar, rising whether anyone deserved it or not.